The outback doesn't whisper, it waits. It stretches out in every direction, vast, raw and ancient. Under a sky so wide it swallows any sense of time. Red dust clings to your boots, to your skin and to your thoughts. During the day the sun bakes the land into silence, the heat rising in waves from the cracked earth. Spinifex sways like brittle wire and ghost scum stand twisted against the horizon like they've had just about enough. Out here, the road is a thin scar through something that never needed taming. But it's at night that the desert really breathes. The stars burn low and heavy, close enough to touch, and the air cools so fast it feels like the heat was never real. In that darkness, your eyes start to play tricks. Or maybe they don't. When a feeling tells you that you're not alone, how do you convince your eyes that they aren't seeing what they show you? Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land across Australia. Today we are recording on Wonnarua land, and this story takes place across Pitta land. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and to the ancestors who have walked this land for countless generations. Guardians of sacred knowledge, keepers of stories, and witnesses to the Min Min lights. We acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening to this podcast. We honour the connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to the land, sky, water, and spirit.
And he's like, get down here. You've got to come. You've got to see this. He described it as a floating bright light that appeared to pursue him despite his efforts to outrun it. A lot of my people say you've got to just keep going the same pace and don't follow it. He got a real sense that it was sentient, like it was intelligent. Sometimes the best stories aren't the ones with answers. Hi, Megan.
Good morning.
How's your week been?
I've had a great week.
That's good.
I think that I finally simplified my life last night.
Good work. Had an artist retreat.
I did, just on my land in my little tiny home, but I didn't have a phone. And it was just the best night ever.
And it's why she did not do the homework that I set for her.
I didn't get my homework done. I'm very sorry.
It's okay, because you're going to learn all of the things that you would have learnt in that anyway. It just would have given you an opportunity to have some opinions about it. I was thinking that maybe it could be beneficial, given that we sit maybe on different spectrums of the woo, that that maybe it would be interesting to get your perspective on what we're going to talk about today. I've had a strange week. I'm being stalked by birds of prey.
Okay.
I've had a huge wedge-tailed eagle, which I took a photo of and I put it up on socials. And he come across the front of the car and I thought it was like one of those stealth military aircraft, you know, like the triangle ones.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell in Mandalong? And then I realised it was a wedgie. And he then landed in the tree right where my car was. I was at work. So I jumped out of the car so I could take photos of him. And we just kind of stood there and like really looked at each other. And he was like, don't know about you, love. And I was like looking at his big chunky legs and his talons gripping the thing. And I'm like, oh, is this safe? Like, are you going to claw my face off? Anyway, we kind of hung there for a minute with each other and then he took off. And then I'm assuming he was the boy because he was bigger. And then his girlfriend flew over and I'm assuming, were sitting in the tree going, who's this bitch? That might not have been what they were saying, but that's what I'm going with. So I had that. Then the next day I was driving and a big sea eagle come down like in front of the car. And I was like, wedgie yesterday, sea eagle today. Then today driving in here, down the bottom at the cattle yards, there was a huge like hawk, like a big, I don't know what type of hawk it was. And same thing, I pulled up and he just stared at me. And then coming along the driveway when I got to just before the last cattle grid, one of the kestrels flew. He was sitting on the
fence
post.
I know. I saw them yesterday.
And then he flew in front of my car, like along the road as I followed him. And I'm like, what is going on?
Sending you a message.
I need to find out what birds of prey signify in your life.
Yeah. I'm a little worried about what you find out there because I don't know a lot about birds, but I do have a kestrel story.
Okay, tell me.
It would have been February last year. I was driving home from a work trip in Lightning Ridge. I did the whole trip in one day and I was just outside of Walgett.
There's heaps up there
So
too.
many.
When we went to Lightning Ridge, I noticed them everywhere.
Everywhere. And always on the road, eating roadkill and
Yep.
finding all of the seeds that had fallen off the trucks and stuff.
Yep.
And I avoided most of them. And I thought I'd hit something, but I didn't hear it go under the car or anything. And I just kept driving. The next day, when I went outside, I heard this noise coming from my car. It was inside of the grill of my car and had come all of the way from Walgett. I didn't know what it was. And I'd got
How far
I
had you
out.
travelled?
This was like a 9-hour drive.
Oh, my God.
Poor little thing. And I didn't realise, and I've wrapped it up in a towel and I rang wires and they were like, what kind of bird is it? Is it a bird of prey? I don't even know how to tell the difference between a bird of prey and a not bird of prey.
If it looks like it'll eat your face, it's a bird of prey.
Right. Well, I sent this lady photos and she was like, oh, yeah, that's a rare Australian kestrel. You need to get that into the vet as soon as you can because it was hot. It couldn't fly away. It was just a little bit hurt. So I'm hoping that when I dropped that off the vet, they fixed all of its problems and set it free. I'm sure that's what happened.
Yeah, let's run with that. I did have that hope too. We found an emperor penguin when we were in Tasmania and he was just sitting on a beach. And there was a man there. Actually, he's a beautiful man. His name's Warren Donnelly and he's a Tasmanian photographer and I love him and you should follow him on Facebook and stuff because his photos are extraordinary. But we just met him and we got down so close to this penguin, but he wasn't okay. We could tell he wasn't okay. So we made calls to the National Park Service and they came. Warren stayed because we were travelling and we had all of these places that we needed to be. So Warren stayed until the national parks people came and they took him away and they did some treatment and stuff, but he didn't make it. But Warren contacted me on Facebook to let me know, which was sad. But in my mind, I was just pretending like maybe they put him back in the water and he swam to Antarctica. Yeah.
Sounds like we need to get Warren on here one day.
He's a cool dude. I really, really like Warren. So, yeah, we probably should. But that's not even close to where we're going today. We're heading to outback Queensland. The Min Min Hotel is at the eerie heart of one of Australia's most enduring outback mysteries, the Min Min Lights. Its story begins in the early 20th century in the remote reaches of Western Queensland near the tiny settlement of Boolyah in Channel Country. The hotel itself was a rough bush pub, built sometime around the early 1900s to serve drovers and travellers and stockmen passing through the long expanse of outback. It was reportedly a rowdy, lawless place, frequented by shearers, drinkers, and said to be the site of some violent encounters. According to local law, the hotel eventually burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. The exact date of the fire is unclear, but many accounts place it sometime before 1920. The legend of the Min Min Lights is said to have begun shortly after the hotel's destruction. The first widely reported sighting occurred in 1918 when a stockman riding near the ruins claimed he saw a strange hovering light that followed him for several kilometres. He described it as a floating bright light, sometimes bluish, sometimes white, that appeared to pursue him despite his efforts to outrun it. When he returned to town and told others, he expected to be laughed at. Instead, people nodded. Others had seen it too. Over time, the Min Min Lights became part of outback folklore. Mysterious orbs of light that appear, hover, and sometimes seem to change direction and follow people across the desert at night. They're most commonly seen in the Boolyah region, but reports have come from as far as central New South Wales and Western Australia. First Nations people have stories of the lights dating back generations and seem to believe the lights are spirits. Others claim they're natural but unexplained atmospheric phenomenon. But the Min Min Hotel in ruins and long gone remains the origin point for modern folklore, where the ghostly lights first entered the imagination of the outback. The Min Min lights seem to look just like orbs, which will show up in photos and stuff. They're a bit furry around the edges, so it's not like a solid light. Like, say, if you're out in the bush and you see a headlight coming in, you can see like a solid light or a torchlight. They seem to be a bit furry around the edges, like an orb. And we're going to talk a little bit later about a documentary, which was Megan's homework, which she didn't do.
Sorry.
Where they get some really great footage, like up close. And actually, when they zoomed right in on it, it looked like Aboriginal art. It had like all of these little sort of dots on the inside of it. It was very, very pretty. But anyway, we're going to talk about some experiences and some theories and what's going on out there in the outback, because it's not just that region.
So not a firefly?
That's a theory as well. So some scientists have said, do you know about bioluminescence?
Yeah.
So some people have said that maybe it could be like insects that have gone into like bioluminescence and then they swarm together, and that could be what people are seeing. There's also a suggestion that it could be an owl that has bioluminescent properties. I don't think that's the real word. But nobody's ever actually found this owl. They've talked about it and they say it's a thing, but there's no actual evidence of this particular owl glowing at night. So I don't know about that. But yeah, there's quite a few theories. If you go to Boulia's Min Min Lights Encounter, there's a bit of a story about the old timers who used to say it's just the young fellas shoving torches up emus' asses, and when they run around, you see the lights coming out their eyes.
Oh, my God.
Because it's a bit of a tourist attraction, right? Like, people know about this everywhere. So they've set up this encounter where you go in, and it kind of gives me old Dubbo jail vibes. You know, like when you go in and there's the talking mannequins and stuff that scare the shit out of you when you walk around a corner and then they start talking. You're not expecting a person to be there. And it's sort of different people from the town and mannequins of them set up in these really beautiful little sets that depict historical outback life. And you walk through and each one tells you a different experience that people have had with the lights. So it looks really cool. It's now on the list. I desperately want to go there. When we planned our Uluru trip, I did ask Scott to take the road through Boulia to Min Min when we were planning to head towards Winton. We haven't done this trip yet. We got sidetracked with something else first. But I said, can we camp at Min Min? Like, I really want to do this. And his answer was no. Same as when I asked him to camp in the Pilliga. No.
Why? He's a yes person? Is he scared?
Well, he tells me he doesn't believe in A, Min Min Lights, or B, Yowies. But the only two places I've ever asked to camp where he's just said no is those two places.
Sounds like he does, and he's just scared.
I just think he's scared. Anyway, so Boulia is in the central west of Queensland and is located approximately 296 kilometres by road south of Mount Isa. Boulia is at the crossroads of a number of outback routes, including the Boulia Mount Isa Road, the Selwyn Road, the Winton Road and the Boulia Baduri Road. The Donahue Highway, coming from the Northern Territory, joins Boulia Mount Isa Road just outside of Boulia, which together with the Winton Road forms part of the Outback Way, which is known as Australia's longest shortcut, which is a 2,800 kilometre gravel and bitumen road which runs between Laverton in Western Australia and Winton in Queensland.
Right.
It's a long road. Boulia has a population of about 314 people. That's, I think, maybe in the town. The Shire is a bit wider and I think it's up to about 500 with people living around the outskirts. And it's located in Channel Country. Channel Country is what was an inland sea, an ancient inland sea. They found lots of fossils out there with marine life and stuff. So all the watercourses in that area form part of the Lake Eyre drainage basin. Most of the rivers and stuff will dry up before their water reaches Lake Eyre, but there are some major rivers that will run, and there are also underground rivers through this area. The main river is the Burke River, which was named after the explorer Robert O'Hara Burke, who passed through the area with the Burke and Wills expedition in 1860.
I did a Year 5 assignment on that.
So I've got written here, primary school explorer lesson.
Excellent. My project, my mum still has it. I hand cut every single page out in the shape of Australia and then did the whole shaved chalk rub in the background thing. It's very impressive.
Shading. I loved shading. So what do you know about Burke and Wills, Megan?
They did the south to north exploration.
They did.
I learned a lot.
It was a long time ago. We'll do a quick side quest into Burke and Wills because it's kind of worth noting. But prior to their expedition, Aboriginal Australians had inhabited this area for thousands of years, with over 25 communities living in Channel Country alone. A vast trade network had been established running from north to south, with goods such as ochre sent north while shells and patchouli moved south. Birdsville was once a major meeting place for conducting ceremonies and trade. So prior to Europeans heading out there
And saying, hey, we just discovered this.
Yeah, there was a whole thing. There was trade. It was great. They were living their best lives out there. And then in 1860, 19 white fellas took off from Melbourne, heading towards the Gulf of Carpentaria. The area was largely unexplored. I think there had been a couple of explorations done, but this was like a major one. So it had been largely unexplored by white people at that time. The party made it from Melbourne to Menindee, which is on the Darling River near Broken Hill.
I've been to Menindee.
Oh, look at you go.
I can add photos to this week's gallery.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Love it, because I have not been to Menindee. Once they made it to Broken Hill, the party divided. So some went one way and Burke, Wills and his little group of dudes headed north. The next place they landed was at Cooper Creek, which is just over the South Australian border, just below the Northern Territory, and they set up a depot there. From there, some of the crew stayed behind and Burke and Wills and two others pushed on to the Gulf alone. They did make it, but on their return, the monsoonal rains set in, which they obviously were not prepared for. So it delayed them a lot. By the time they returned to Cooper Creek, they found the depot abandoned. So the people who'd been working there and waiting for them to come back had gone, they're dead, let's go home.
To think there was a world when we didn't have phones.
I know.
Here I am. I've just made it through maybe 20 hours without a phone, and I'm giving myself a pat on the back. Wow.
Yeah, that was a long way to go with no way to connect to anyone to go, hey, I'm in trouble here. And they probably could have done with a phone because Burke and Wills did die of starvation at Cooper Creek in June 1861. John King, who was one of the other men, was the only one of the four that headed north to make it back to Melbourne, and he was only able to do that due to the assistance of the Indigenous community.
Of course.
Those early guys realised that horses didn't last for long in the outback. So the government at the time imported a heap of camels from India and Afghanistan. And obviously they go out on these explorations, and then when food and water and stuff started to become a real issue, they just cut the camels loose and let them go because it was less, they had to worry about less water that they needed to, that they could keep for themselves. And then obviously as travel methods changed, they just released the population that they had left over that hadn't already been sent out into the outback. And that's why when you travel through the outback, we have a heap of camels. And if you want to know about the ecological damage that big, large, non-native creatures do, go back and listen to Alex Maisie's episode where he talks about deer, because their effect on the ecosystem is pretty well the same.
But why did you do that?
Boulia, the town, was named by surveyor Frederick Arthur Hartnell in 1882 and was derived from the name of the waterhole near the township called Bulyo in the Pita Pita language, which is now classed as endangered. And going down rabbit holes like I do, I was like, I'm just going to pop a few points together and we're going to go in unscripted tomorrow. But then I started learning about the Pita Pita language, and then I learned a heap of words, and there are people trying to take that and revive it and put it into text and teach it to kids. And I think quite a few years ago there was only 3 people who spoke it fluently left, but that number's increased. So they're really working on cementing that language and being able to take it forward into the future, which I think is a lovely thing.
Look at you sharing nice stories.
I do like to not traumatise everyone, like just little nuggets of gold in there between the yucky stuff. In Queensland, the Boulia Shire Council notifies visitors in the interest of tourism that they are in the land of the Min Min lights and they may spot them as they drive for the next 120 kilometres. But Boulia is not the only place the Min Min are spotted. In the Kimberley in Western Australia, some Aboriginal people also believe the Min Min lights are spirits of elders. As a kid growing up, the old people used to tell me that the Min Min lights were old people's spirits looking after country, Wynnum local James Birch said. Mr Birch, a Ballinjarra ranger, said everyone from his childhood grew up hearing these stories. If you lived in the Kimberley, you would have experienced spotting a Min Min light once in your life, he said. Mr Birch has not seen the Min Min lights for 2 years, but said the lights tend to distract people and take them off their chosen path. Kalinda Clough, who is from Blair Atoll Station, gave her account. My sister, who is 4 years older than me, she was 19, took a friend, Shelley, and me, and my sister Kim up to a watering hole about 20 kilometres from Linda Downs. It was about 9 o'clock, quite dark at night. We were sitting around the fire talking and we saw what we thought was a spotlight. Like, a spotlight for roo shooting. We said, I wonder who that roo shooter is over there. We watched this light for a while. It seemed to be getting closer and we thought, that's funny because we couldn't hear anything. No sound, nothing like a motor vehicle, and they hadn't made a shot or anything. It was strange. It seemed to be where we thought was fairly thick gidgee scrub. We thought, well, that's weird. But anyway, we were still talking and the light got closer and closer to us. Then one of us said it must be a UFO because this white light was hovering above the track and seemed to be getting closer and closer and larger because it was coming right towards us. We said, it is a UFO. This is in her words. So we had a Toyota Ute and then the 3 of us just crowded in the front. We left our swags at the camp and we headed back to Linda Downs. We watched the light. It seemed to follow us for a while. By the time we got to the first gate, about 10 k's from our camp, it had more or less faded behind us. Here is another account from Melinda Punch, who is a Boulia Shire local. She says, I remember one occasion I was coming back from Urendi, heading towards Boulia. I was coming up and there was a stop about 20 kilometres out. I thought these guys were in the bloody yard tracking something. We were coming up to it and it was on my left side. When we got closer, I realised the light wasn't touching the ground and I couldn't see any wheels. I thought, well, that's not a car. So we just kept going. Then it came across behind us and appeared on the right side and followed us. I said, well, if that was a car, you'd see the roof. And my son said, that couldn't be a car. It followed us right up to the turnoff and then it went backwards. It was like it turned around and got away from us, just zoom backwards like that. A lot of my people say that when you see it at night, don't try and speed up or anything because that's when accidents happen. You've got to just keep going the same pace and don't follow it.
That's obviously an Aboriginal person telling that
That
story.
lady
She talks
is
about
an Indigenous
her people.
person, yes. And the first one was an Indigenous man that was from the Kimberley as well.
Why would you not follow it? What would be the bad thing that would happen if you followed it? What's their belief?
So the Indigenous people believe that they are spirits of ancestors. Now, I find this problematic because I'm a white girl who's listened to Aboriginal people talk about it, and I feel like you should probably hear it from them. So if you want to understand their understanding about it, like I've shared their accounts, but a lot of these, just go onto the web and type in Indigenous people's beliefs about Min Min lights and it will come up and you can hear it directly from them. I think their cultural beliefs are best heard from them, not my interpretation of what they think. So this one is from Jane and Paul Hodgkins from July 2018. Last night, on the 4th of the 7th, 2018, at Peak Creek, 60 kilometres north of Boulia, we were out of the van at 9 p.m. to find a large yellowish light like a spotlight high, about twice the height of the surrounding trees. The light moved over a period, both up and down, left and right, coming closer and then dropping below the tree line where we couldn't see it until it moved left and right and shone through the trees again. It eventually moved away, well, it looked like it went away, until it disappeared at 9:30. You wouldn't believe it. I'm finding it hard to believe myself. We were staying at Boulia Caravan Park. I was woken by a very bad dream and I got out of bed as I couldn't sleep. I decided to go outside. I had no idea what time it was then, but later worked it out that it would have been approximately 5:30 a.m. It was very still, very dark, a beautiful night, totally clear with thousands of stars out. It was mesmerising. And then I noticed it just above the trees to the northeast. It looked like an intense full moon, but the light was more white. It wasn't the moon, as the moon was only a half moon and it was high in the sky. I quickly ran in and got John out of bed. He wasn't at all happy to be woken at 5:35. However, when he saw the very bright light glowing circle, we both agreed we had seen something very special. I didn't even know what a Min Min looked like. After going to the visitors centre, I saw other photos of Min Mins, and my photo is exactly the same. I feel amazed that both John and I have seen a Min Min. I hope it's lucky, and I wonder why we were chosen to see it.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I thought so too. Little bit less terrifying than some of the ones that other people have experienced where it follows their car and maybe takes over their car and then stops and seems to wait for them to get up to it. There's some really, really scary accounts, and I'm going to give you one that came from the documentary that I watched. There's a few more accounts in there. But before we get into that, so I can play devil's advocate because there's dialectics in everything, there are several different theories. Professor Jack Pettigrew, who is a neuroscientist, suggests that the Min Min lights could be a form of Fata Morgana mirage. A Fata Morgana is a specific form of mirage caused by a stark temperature difference between air layers, which causes remote lights or objects actually beyond the horizon to appear visible above the horizon, often with considerable distortion. He explains that this would also explain how reports of the sightings have changed over the years. The first reports and Aboriginal legends were stationary lights, which could have been refractions over the horizon of campfires. Later reports are of lights that actively move. With a Fata Morgana mirage, this would be a refraction of car headlights over the horizon being reflected and being seen to move. The documentary is called Australian Skies 3, and it is available on Amazon Prime.
In Australia now.
In Australia, and it is free to watch there. You can watch it on some other streaming services as a pay-per-view type thing, but if you've got Prime, you can watch it for free. The documentary is produced by Don Mears, who is the owner of Dojo Media, and he is the film's creator and director, and it follows his journey. So this is the third in the Australian Skies series. He's quite a good documentary maker. I quite like Don's work. And he takes his director of photography, Attila, out to Boulia and different areas around, including the ruins of the Min Min Hotel, and they go out and they film. They talk to different people from the area. It's very, very interesting. And Professor Jack does make an appearance and he talks about his theories, and he went out there and tested them. So he put a car several kilometres away from people, and he put it sort of in a dip. And you have to kind of go into the whole scientific thing of light and arcs, and there's a whole thing of how this works, right?
I know when you're driving along those plains, that weird stuff absolutely happens with your eyes and that horizon and that road.
We talk about it all the time on the way out to Lightning Ridge, and it looks like waves across the top of the road. And like you hear about explorers like seeing mirages and trying to go towards them and go towards them and go towards them. And you actually see it in the documentary, how things over the horizon, like hills. So I think the way he explains it, it's when cold air gets trapped underneath warm air. And it gives the appearance of something that you can't see in the distance that your eyes can see. So it might actually be further than the horizon, but what it does is it pushes it up. And they actually show you images in the documentary of where it happens in the daytime with hills and stuff. So it looks like the hills are floating. And for local people who go through there all the time and know there's not a hill there, and then all of a sudden there's a hill there, but it's actually further than what your eyes can naturally see, and it's all about temperature inversion. So if you've got a scientific brain and you're not all into the woo like I am, go and Google temperature inversion, and you can even look at Jack Pettigrew's paper, which he has provided. So he put the car in sort of a low-lying area, far away from some other people who were the test subjects, and he used the headlights, and he recorded the times that he flashed the headlights, turned them on and off, and then the people far away had to record the times that the min lights appeared and disappeared. Now, I don't disagree with his theory. That explains lights that you see on the horizon, or maybe slightly above the horizon. It doesn't explain a light coming up behind your vehicle and then passing you and then waiting for you to catch up.
Yeah. I love that he did that. Isn't science the best?
Science is the best. And again, it's a theory. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been peer reviewed. It hasn't, done all the things. But he did some experiments and he was like, yep, this is a temperature inversion thing. And there's a place in Norway that has a lot of light stuff happening, and they have scientists set up there all the time. Right. And Professor Jack sent his paper to those people in Norway, and they no longer speak to him. But he reckons that's because they get a lot of money and a lot of funding to do these studies. So he seems like a cool guy. Because they're looking at UFO phenomenon there. But because of the topography of the area, his theory about the temperature inversion would actually suit that area as well. And
right. So I was going to say, why isn't this happening anywhere else in the world? Why is it only happening in this large area, as you've explained?
It's happening in lots of places all over the world, and you can go almost to any country and you will find, so there's Will-o'-wisp, I think is like the English version of this.
Oh, this is in, there are wisps in Brave, the Disney princess.
Right. There you go.
The Scottish movie.
There's also American versions of this. There's also jack-o'-lanterns. So that's where the term jack-o'-lantern comes from.
Wow.
Is these lights that occur, and I don't know what country that comes from. But then there's a whole thing about fairies. And do you remember when we had our conversation with River Morris? He talked about orbs and portholes, and it was a whole big thing, and Megan was like, what is this about?
We didn't put it in the recording, did we?
We didn't put it in that recording. We didn't want to completely bombard people at the time.
Well, you guys did talk for 3 hours.
But in saying that, I have done a lot of Yowie research and listened to lots and lots of accounts, and this phenomenon of these lights often appear, which he was explaining on that day, when he had that encounter with the orbs in the area. So many Yowie encounters include, like they might see it and then off in the distance they'll see orbs and stuff. So there's a whole thing. And then the paranormal stuff with orbs. So I don't want to wreck the outcome of this documentary in case people want to go and watch it for themselves. But basically, Don and Attila head out and they camp a few nights out in the bush. They have some experiences and they capture some cool stuff on film. The first experience they have, they're able to disprove. The second experience, not so much. And poor Attila was shitting himself. He was not okay. I mean, anyone in that situation would be in the same boat. Everybody would have that same reaction. But they speak to a lot of people who know a lot about it. Rick Britton, who's the mayor of the Boulia Shire, comes on and talks a little bit about different experiences he's heard of and what his personal opinions are about it. Jamie Leonarda, who is a media presenter, he worked with the ABC to produce a program called Catch a Falling Star, and it was more about the light phenomena on the Nullarbor and a lot of the same experiences. And he talked to a lot of truck drivers and people who are using that road regularly. And he said there's places on that road that truck drivers will not pull up. Like they are terrified after some of the experiences that they've had there. So it's not localised to Boulia. It does happen, and there's reports of it in the Kimberley and there's reports of it in the Pilbara. Jamie does a lot of talking about that. He's obviously talked to a lot of people. So if you're interested, go and watch this documentary. Loved it, loved it. But the standout was their interview with Matthew Curo, who was the Cloncurry Railway Station supervisor. So Matthew tells a story about he was at work and he was working with two guys. It was a night shift. They had to head out to check a few points around where they were working, and they took off about 9 p.m. Two of them, one of them stayed back at the depot or the office or whatever it was. While they were driving, they spotted a light that was about 30 metres in the air, and at first they thought it was a helicopter. So they were kind of watching it, and it was just a solid light. There was, you know how like helicopters have the different coloured flashing lights that will be with the normal light, and they couldn't find these lights. So they were kind of watching it and it was moving around in the sky. So they decided to just pull up and they turned the car off and turn the lights off so they could just kind of watch what it was doing. And they noticed as soon as they turned the car off that it was making no noise. It was close enough to them that if it was a helicopter, they would have been able to hear it. So they were starting to go, hang on, what is this thing? They watched for a little while. They started the car again. And as they started to take off, it came in really close, but then kind of went off in front of them. And Matthew particularly, I think his workmate was absolutely packing it. But Matthew was like, follow it. And they followed it down.
Don't do that.
They followed it down and it went across the river and kind of ducked down into the shrubs and went dark. And Matthew said they turned the lights off because they thought it had gone. So he turned the lights off and jumped out of the car, and his mate saying to him, do not get out of this car. And he's like, no.
Don't get out of the car.
It's like every horror movie. Like he's screaming at him the whole time, don't do it. So he gets out of the car and they turn the thing off, and his mate's kind of shining the torch looking for it. And he's like, turn the torches off. Just be quiet. Just be quiet. And when everything went quiet, it started to glow again and slowly started to float across the river towards him. Well, his mate was like freaking out. And I have heard an interview with Don, who is the director, and there was a bit cut out there of how bad that actually was for that man, because they didn't want to make fun of him. Like they wanted to be respectful of how terrifying that was for him, but he was not okay, right?
Did he shit himself?
No, he didn't shit himself. I think he may have been a religious man, and he may have had some beliefs around it being an evil spirit or something. So he was not okay. So Matt called the guy who was back at the office, and he's like, get down here. You've got to come. You've got to see this. So old mate pulls up.
How far away is the office?
I don't know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes.
This has been going on for a long time.
It went for a long time. I think he said at one point they were watching it for about 40 minutes.
Wow.
And it was moving the whole time, like it was moving away and it was coming closer. And the workmate turned up. He flipped out as well. So the more noise they made, the lighter the light would go and it'd move away from them. And then when they were quiet, it would move back towards them. And the two boys were like freaking out. So he's like, I'm going to head up here onto the train line away from you guys and see if I can interact with it. These guys could still see what was going on. So it wasn't like he snuck off so he could make up a story. These two guys could still witness what was happening. And he got up onto the train line and he said it was really glowing and it was quite close to him. And he put his hand out a couple of times to try and reach out and touch it and it would move away from him. And then when he put his hands down, it would sort of come back closer to him. And he said he got a real sense that it was sentient, like it was intelligent. It knew what it liked and what it felt comfortable with and reacted accordingly. And so he spent a little bit of time up there on the train line with it, and then just for no particular reason at all, it just shot down the train line and like heading towards Mount Isa and just whipped away, and they've never ever seen it again. So he is the site supervisor for that mine. He then had to go back and write a report of what they witnessed, because the Min Min lights are something that is not unheard of in the train community. There have been train drivers who have thought they were about to have a head-on collision with another train. There's been train drivers who thought that there was people on the tracks because they could see these reflection in the tracks, and then as the train would get close, they'd fly up into the air. So he had to record this as a proper documented risk assessment. Yeah, that's right. And he had a lot of concerns about what people were going to say. Don explains in the interview that I listened to him when he was talking about it, how great it is because he's just removed any emotion out of it, and it's just this really factual account and what a great source of evidence it is for that experience. But you see him interviewed and he explains it in a lot more depth than what I've done here. It is worth watching it just to hear this man's encounter because it is crazy. And Jamie, the guy from the ABC, said that he found when he was doing his research in the Nullarbor that there was also a huge amount of occurrences on train lines. There are a lot of train drivers who will refuse to work in those areas, or they come and work there for a while and then move to a different position. There's a high turnover of staff in those roles because of some of these really unexplainable experiences. I think he did mention too that there's been some miners that have seen him in mine shafts, which would completely dispel Jack's theory. There is a guy, John, who is a Boulia local, and he runs the Desert Sands Motel, and he's had an encounter himself that he explains in the documentary, and he talks a little bit about gases in the area. Like there's a lot of underground rivers and there is also uranium and things like that out in those areas, and he wonders if maybe it's gases, and I think there's been some scientific exploration done into that. He also mentions that there are a lot of scientists, because I don't know how many motels there are in Boulia, but he owns one of them, and he mentions a lot of scientific people have come and been in the area trying to either prove or disprove or come up with some theory of what it might be. And this is where the stuff like the bioluminescence and the weird owl and all of these other things come in as different possibilities. I feel pretty certain that I can say it's not an emu with a torch in its bum.
Okay.
Yep.
The whole time you've been talking, I think, would an animal behave that way? And not around me, but maybe around you. Like whether it's an owl or an emu or a bug, would it behave that way?
I don't know, and I don't know what insect is large enough to produce these lights. You'll have to have a look at some pictures so you can get an idea of it.
We as a human race, we just seem to think that we're pretty smart and we've figured so many things out, but there's just still so much about the world we have no idea about.
We do have a little sense of entitlement, don't we? Like, we are the most important thing. We're the only thing that exists in the universe. I just think one day maybe we might find out that we're not. And I'm not saying it's UFOs. There's lots of people who say, oh, yeah, it's UFOs. I don't know what my feelings are about that. I just think scientific theories, like, they're great and I love them. So you can kind of have that, especially when you are a woo person. Like, I love the woo. I love all of the spooky mystery. You guys know this about me. I don't have to explain it. But I do like to have that
perspective.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for, perspective on, you know, like, is there a plausible excuse? And 100%, Jack Pettigrew, spot on, mate. Great experiment, nailed it. That really does explain a lot of the horizontal encounters.
But even when we're not talking about topics of woo, as you like to put it, you are always trying to look at everyone's perspective in a situation.
Yeah, I think I do, because that's how I learn.
It's an excellent trait to have. I think that not enough people do that.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks. That's lovely. I do sometimes think it means I can be flippant because then I learn something from someone. But I really love talking to people with big ideas and big opinions and people who are researched, like are knowledgeable about something. Like, I just don't want to know. I want to know your opinion, but I want it to be backed up with some kind of knowledge, not just because it's what Koshi told you on Sunrise. Like, not interested in that.
Or just because you think it.
Or just because you think it, yeah.
And you think you're pretty smart.
What's your theory? I just want to know what your theory is. Like, where do you sit?
I feel very much like you. I don't have a theory. I'm listening to everyone. I'm going, yep, okay. I'd need to experience it myself.
Yep.
But then when you listen to, it's the same as when we talk about ghosts with you. And you are my proof that I believe. Like, I completely trust that you're not making stuff up. Yeah, all of those people can't be wrong.
I want to throw in just a theory, and this is where I'm going to smudge my boundaries around white girl etiquette in relation to Indigenous beliefs. And it's just a theory. We talked to River about, do you remember when we talked about the Blue Mountains and the spirits of the people that will encourage you into the water and how they turn up as orbs? Mm-hmm. The fact that this is an underground or an ancient sea, in the documentary, both times they see this light, it's over a creek. Matt talks about it going over the creek and hiding. And I've done a little bit of research into songlines and ley lines, and they're two completely different things. Songlines are a cultural significant thing, which is how the ancient spirits mapped the land, and then the Aboriginal communities would follow those songlines and sing, and that was how they mapped the land and knew how to get to places. And ley lines is different. It's more a esoterical thing, and you can go right into it, but normal people talk about ley lines being like energy in the earth that travels the shortest distance. Like, the energy will always take the path of least resistance, right? So we all know that the earth is electrical, and my granddad said to me when I was little, take your shoes off when you're in the backyard. It's how you connect to the earth. And now it's a real thing, right? So that's always been in my life. Now it's a real thing, and we go into nature and we do grounding and we do. I'm saying that like with a bit of sarcasm in my voice, but that's great. People should absolutely be doing that. But there is energy and fields and all of these things that occur naturally in the earth. And I just wonder whether maybe sometimes that energy pops out, and it kind of fits in with the whole paranormal thing of, you know, spirits and energy, and that's why you can see things, and the Indigenous belief of the elders and people who take care of the land and making song lines and pouring that energy into the earth that then gets passed on. There's something about all of that. And when I look at it and I'm like, this was an ancient in-ground sea. Like, there's rivers running under the earth. There would be all kinds of electrical currents and different things occurring in these places. So I wonder if there's an energy element rather than, like, say, gas or temperature inversion, or that's kind of where I sit. I need to do some more research. This is just as I've been watching. And I could probably do a 2-part episode on ley lines and all of that crap, but no one needs that much woo in their lives.
I'm very impressed with your theory.
Thank you. I'm glad you're impressed with my theory. I have no evidence to support any of this. I think it just aligns with my belief systems, maybe. And Don says right at the end of the documentary, he said, what you think about this will be based on what you believe is possible. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone who has zero woo, you're going to say it's science. If you're someone who sits in the middle, I don't know, temperature inversion.
I feel like at work and in life, I'm always asking questions because I want to learn more. But in topics like this, I'm happy to sit with it just is.
It just is. And perhaps that's the point of these things, that they just are. Because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones with answers, but the ones that leave you looking back over your shoulder, wondering what still might be out there in the dark.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of If These Trees Could Talk. If you would like to access more about the places or information included in today's topic, please visit our website, ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. If you would like to follow us on our adventures, check us out on Facebook or Insta. Our creative writer is Shannon Walters, and our podcast is produced at Bellevue Studio in the Hunter Valley with audio production by Megan Anderson. We love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. We look forward to you joining us for our next adventure.